The package was small, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Clean architectural strokes. My father's. I hadn't seen it since the day I left his house 7 years ago with a split lip and a promise to never look back. Inside was a dark wooden box polished and lined with navy velvet. One piece of chocolate rested at the center, perfectly molded, glossy, dusted with gold powder like it had come from a boutique. A folded note sat beneath it, for the strongest one. Love, Dad. No apology, no explanation. Just that. I stared at it on my kitchen counter, not touching it, not throwing it away either. Irina arrived an hour later with Micah in tow, carrying a lopsided cake and enough candles to embarrass me. Her hair was pulled back in its usual rushed bun, and Micah was already pulling magnets off the fridge before she'd unzipped her coat. "What's that?" she asked, nodding to the box. "A gift," I said. "From Dad." Her eyebrows shot up. Dad, as in, vanished after Mom's funeral? Dad, the very same. I opened the lid to show her. A single chocolate, because nothing says, "Sorry I emotionally terrorized your entire adolescence," like confectionery. Irina laughed, shaking her head. Weird flex. Want it? I offered, half joking, half uncomfortable. I'm not eating anything he made. She looked at me, then shrugged. Why not? Free chocolate. She popped it into her mouth before I could say anything else. I remember her chewing slowly, brow furrowing. Tastes like lavender. And fennel. 15 minutes later, she said her stomach hurt. 20 minutes in, she collapsed on my bathroom floor, shaking cold sweat pouring down her face as Micah screamed from the hallway. I rode with her in the ambulance. They asked what she'd eaten. I told them. A single piece of chocolate, made by my father, and meant for me. The ER nurse said they caught it early. Irina's vitals were stable, though her blood pressure had dipped dangerously low. They were running a tox screen just in case. I sat beside her unconscious form, watching the monitor beep its steady rhythm. Micah slept in the pediatric wing. I had promised him too brightly that everything would be okay. The moment the curtain drew shut around Irina's bed, I felt it the weight of something old, something unfinished. Mom had been sick a lot, hadn't she? Nausea that never made sense. Migraines that came out of nowhere. Stomach flus no one else caught. She always said she was just sensitive, but Dad had his own theories. She was too emotional, too soft. Stress-related, he'd say flatly, like she'd chosen to collapse on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m. Then, he'd serve her herbal tea from the cabinet he locked. When I was 12, I'd asked why he kept the tea behind a padlock. He'd answered without looking up. Not everything is meant for everyone. I hadn't thought of that moment in years. Now it felt radioactive. I stepped out to the corridor into the hospital's fake citrus air. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A number I didn't have saved, but I knew it. I could feel it in my chest before I saw the digits. I picked up. Hello? A pause. Then his voice measured distant familiar in all the wrong ways. Corinne. Did you like the chocolate? I swallowed hard. I gave it to Irina. Silence. Long enough to stretch warp curdle. You did what his tone shifted tight and sharp. She's in the hospital. I said, my voice low. I'm with her now. He didn't respond. Just a click. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, and for the first time I didn't feel confused. I felt cold and certain. It hadn't been a gesture. It had been a test, a message, a warning, and I had passed it to the wrong person. I hadn't been back to the old house since I left for college. I kept the keys mostly out of inertia. The place hadn't been touched in years. Dust clung to the baseboards like memories too stubborn to sweep away. The study still smelled like him sharp chemical dry. I opened drawer after drawer, finding nothing but old receipts and inkless pens. Until I got to the bottom desk drawer, the one with the tarnished brass lock. It had been jammed shut when I was a kid. Now it gave with a hard tug. Inside were dozens of papers stacked and yellowed. Some were prescriptions in his name, others handwritten formulas, ratios of herbs. I didn't recognize monkshood aconite belladonna. There were notations in the margins. Observe after 4 minutes. Sweat onset. Success. One card was labeled Helen 1989, written in the same tidy script from the chocolate box. I dropped it. I remembered the night Mom passed out after sipping tea with him. He'd insisted she was dehydrated. I'd made her toast, but she vomited before she could eat it. The ER called it a virus. He'd called it emotional hysteria. I walked back into the hallway, trying to shake the cloying smell of dried rosemary and floor polish. Micah was sitting on the stairs, tracing the edges of the banister. "This place is spooky," he whispered. "Did Grandpa live here too?" "He used to." "He was here last week," Micah added without looking at me. "When you went to the store." He knocked on the back door. I didn't answer, but he left something on the porch. My chest tightened. "What did he say?" Micah turned to me slowly. He told me secrets taste sweet, and that I'd know when I was ready. My breath caught. "Did you eat anything he gave you?" He shook his head. I threw it in the bushes. It smelled like cough medicine. I crouched and hugged him too tightly. He wriggled away, annoyed. Outside, I found the neighbor, Mrs. Keene, trimming her hydrangeas. When I asked about Silas, she nodded grimly. Moved out to a cabin in Indiana. No internet, no phone. Said he wanted to be closer to the source. Whatever that means. I knew what it meant, and I wasn't waiting for him to show up again. Maeve Adley lived in a room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and forgotten time. Her voice was still sharp, though age had softened the edges of her face. When I told the receptionist I was Corinne Lark, her expression shifted. "She's been asking for you." I wasn't sure what I expected when I stepped in, perhaps denial or confusion. But Maeve took one look at me and said, "So, he's started again." She didn't need me to explain. She already knew. We sat in silence for a while. She sipped chamomile tea from a cracked mug with her name printed on it in fading vinyl. "Your father was never as smart as he thought he was," she said eventually. "But he was observant. Dangerous in the way people are when they believe they're special." I asked about my grandfather. Edward Lark, she said, as if the name itself left a bitter taste. Licensed pharmacist, revered elder, dosed his own wife with remedies when she got too moody, kept a locked cupboard full of extracts and poisons, all documented like a scientist, but with none of the ethics. She paused. "There was a girl, Leora. Your grandfather took her in. Said she was a distant cousin, sweet girl, always tired, always pale. She was gone before she turned 15. They said her mother came and took her back. But I knew better." Maeve stood slowly and walked to her closet. From a tin box on the top shelf, she pulled out a small glass vial, amber-colored with a faded label in delicate cursive. "Leora Final Stage." I held it like it might burn. The residue at the bottom clung to the glass like something alive. He kept records. Your father found them. Obsessed over them, Maeve said. Helen, your mother, tried to get him to stop. That's when things got worse. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He thinks he's continuing some grand work, she said. But really, he's just repeating it. When I left, the sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I kept the vial in my coat pocket wrapped in a handkerchief, feeling its weight as I drove straight toward Indiana. The driveway was a narrow strip of gravel flanked by bare trees and tangled brush. His truck wasn't there. No lights on. I parked out of sight, waited a full 10 minutes, then tried the back door. It gave under light pressure, creaking like it hadn't been opened in weeks. Inside, the air was dense, a blend of dried herbs dust and something sharper metallic, like the inside of a forgotten drawer full of razors. The kitchen had no food, just rows of apothecary-style jars on open shelves. Each was meticulously labeled Aconitum digitalis henbane valerian. Some held dried leaves, others thick pastes or powdered resin. Then there were smaller jars, some empty, others filled with buttons, bits of lace lengths of ribbon, even what looked like tufts of hair. At the center of the shelf, a single jar caught my eye. The handwriting on the label was smaller than the others and cleaner. Corinne proof. My throat tightened. I didn't open it. I didn't want to know. In the next room, what must have once been a study had transformed into something else. The walls were lined with framed botanical illustrations and taped diagrams of the human nervous system. At the far end of the room was a desk cluttered with papers, photographs, and vials, but it was the cabinet beside it that pulled me forward. The top drawer was locked. I took a fire poker from the hearth and pried it open. Inside, dozens of photographs, all black and white, girls and young women. Some looked like school portraits. Others were candid shots smiling at picnics sitting on porches. On the back of each one, a name and a single word. Aurelia Pure Juniper Failed Elise-Resistant Leora Final Stage. Then I found the one labeled Helen First Betrayal. I dropped it. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Beneath the drawer was a shallow altar. That's the only word that fits. 3 white candles sat melted down to the base. Tufts of burnt hair in a small clay bowl, and in the center a chunk of chocolate. Discolored, dusty, familiar. It was identical to the one he'd sent me. This wasn't madness. It was ritual. It had rules, ingredients, instructions. And I had nearly followed them. I backed away, heart pounding, ready to leave, but a sound froze me, a sharp click followed by the soft groan of hinges. The front door had just opened. I didn't get caught. Whoever opened the door must have left again or hadn't come in all the way. I drove through the night with the windows cracked, just enough to keep me awake, the jar labeled with my name strapped into the passenger seat like a passenger I couldn't ignore. The next morning, Detective Reese Mercer was waiting for me outside the hospital. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, thoughtful eyes, too calm for someone in homicide. We sat in an unmarked car in the garage while he read from a folder. Preliminary talks screen came back. Your sister had trace amounts of Aconitum napellus. Monkshood, he said, flipping a page. Highly toxic. Fast acting. I nodded. I already knew. What you might not know, he continued, is that your father's fingerprints just matched partials in a 1986 missing person case. A nurse named Evelyn Rhodes. Went out with a hospital orderly. Never came back. He was using the alias Charles Fenn. But the prints match Silas. I stared ahead. And yet he kept mine. We also found your DNA on the wrapper from the chocolate box he added. Not Irina's. I turned toward him slowly. So that chocolate wasn't for her, he said. He wanted it to be you. I didn't flinch. Then he miscalculated. Mercer hesitated, then handed me an envelope. This came to the precinct this morning. No return address. Your name. He knew where to send it. Inside was a single card, thick and off-white, the ink pressed deep into the paper. Only the worthy one carries the line forward. The weak dissolve. S. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. He wasn't just trying to eliminate me. He was trying to shape me, to bend me into something he could justify. The next phase of whatever twisted legacy he believed he was preserving. He wasn't hunting me. He was grooming me to replace him. And he wasn't finished. The call came at 2:14 p.m. Irina's voice was already hoarse with panic. They said he had a fever, she cried. A woman showed hospital ID, said she was taking Micah for labs. The nurse turned away for 1 second and they were gone. We traced the van to a rural camera hit heading east fast. Mercer's contact and property records found a match an abandoned community center 20 minutes out listed under a foundation Silas had donated to 2 years ago. A place I didn't even know he was connected to. We didn't wait for backup. The parking lot was empty, but not quiet. Wind rustled through a half-collapsed swing set out back. Inside the building was still wired for emergency lights. The air was warm, unnaturally sweet spices and sugar like a bakery just after dawn. The kitchen door creaked when Mercer pushed it open. He was standing there back to us. White apron. Calm. Like we'd arrived early to a demonstration. Micah sat in a chair slumped but breathing. A faint line of drool ran from his mouth to his shirt. I didn't harm him, Silas said without turning. He's untouched. This isn't his trial. He gestured to a tray of chocolates. Fresh. Identical to the one he had sent me. This is the last test, Corinne. If you are who I believe, you'll survive it. You'll understand. I stepped forward slowly, took one piece in trembling fingers, brought it close to my lips. He smiled just slightly. Then I threw the tray. It hit the wall and shattered into pieces. He lunged at me, hand catching my wrist hard enough to bruise. I fought back adrenaline, making my movements wild and wide. He was stronger, but he was also slower. Mercer tackled him from the side, pinning him with practiced weight. Silas squirmed, then slipped free with a sharp twist and bolted through the rear exit, disappearing into the trees. Mercer cursed, pulled his radio. He's on foot, heading north through the woods. I ran to Micah and cradled his face in my hands. His breath was steady. Mercer called in the medics to back up the full report, but I couldn't stay. I looked at Mercer. "We finish this?" I said, and then I followed Silas into the trees. They found him an hour after I did, kneeling in the underbrush, arms streaked with scratches, mumbling about lineage and blood and taste. He didn't resist when the officers pulled him up. His hands were still stained with soil and melted chocolate. The forensics report uncovered more than I was prepared for. Records, preserved samples, tapes, a hand-drawn book with dosage charts spanning 3 decades. Silas hadn't just kept track, he'd documented, refined, archived. There were names I didn't recognize. There were some I did. They charged him with multiple counts of attempted murder, and with new evidence reopened at least 2 cold cases. I didn't attend the arraignment. I didn't want his eyes finding mine in a courtroom. Let the state handle him. My job was to repair what he'd spent a lifetime unraveling. Maeve passed away 3 weeks after his arrest. Her heart, they said, though I suspected the real cause was the release of weight she'd carried alone for far too long. Among her belongings was a locked tin addressed to me. Inside her nursing journals, yellowed pages scrawled in a hand that had steadied many dying people and documented the quiet pain of one family. One entry read, "Corinne's mother's second attempt. Weaker symptoms. Adjustments made." Irina recovered slowly. The tremors subsided. Micah went back to school. He drew a picture of me with a big shield and labeled it anti-food guard. I pinned it to the fridge without a word. Therapy didn't fix me, but it gave shape to the mess and room to breathe around it. I started attending a group for survivors of covert abuse women whose caretakers used love as a leash. Eventually, I began leading one. I started writing anonymously too, just short reflections. One found its way into a magazine's wellness column. The final line read, "Love isn't a test. It's not something you survive. It's what nourishes without asking for proof." One morning, I passed a bakery near the corner of my street. A teenager stood outside holding a tray of truffles. "Free sample?" she asked, smiling. I paused, looked at the chocolate, looked at her, then smiled back. "No, thank you." And I kept walking. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood that I could choose what fed me and what didn't.